Welcome. You've clicked your way onto Three Guys and an iPad, the only mortgage industry podcast not invited to a single inauguration party. I'm Brian Rieger, and I am joined as always by my co-founder at Content Beacon, Mr. Rick Grant from somewhere in northern Wisconsin. Rick, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Brian. It's good to see you as always. Looking forward to this show.
Likewise. We've got a good one. And we wouldn't be Three Guys without the person we like to refer to as our eye candy, Kevin Breeland of Amplify Credit Union down there in nice, toasty, warm Austin, Texas. Kevin, how you been?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you for being there. Thanks for joining us again. This is the point of the show where I make our brief, shameless plug for Content Beacon, the leading B2B content marketing agency in the mortgage industry. If you'd like to be on the podcast, if you'd like to see us talk about someone or talk about something, if you'd like to find out about Content Beacon, Rick's and my email addresses are in the show notes, brian@contentbeacon.com and rick@contentbeacon.com. But without further ado, something that we've not had for quite some time here, it's time to bring it back. I'm going to throw it over to my friend Kevin, who asks, are you kidding me?
Well, thank you, Brian. And I know you and Rick have known me long enough to I think about 15, 16 years now that, I consider myself a humanitarian to some degree and care about my fellow man. And as I've gotten older and much more mellower, I get concerned about how people are doing. So this whole billionaire net worth fight that's been going on between Jeff and Elon has really caught my eye because, it's fascinating to me that, first of all, we need to worry about something like this. And second of all, that we need to read about something like this. But let me kind of give you a little backdrop. So, Jeff has been the richest man in America for a very long time, even after he gave McKinsey $35 billion in their settlement. He was still the richest man in the U.S. And then COVID-19 came. And of course, we had, great concerns about all businesses. But in true Jeff fashion, he's had the Teflon effect. And instead of, having to shell out a lot of cash just to keep things going, he's increased his net worth to well over $180 billion this year. So I would say in 2020, he had about a $60 billion increase. And you would think that that's a lot of money, 60 billion. You could give me that, and I could assure you that I would announce my retirement on the show, drop my my earphones, and walk away.
As would I. Yep.
But as impressive as that is, Elon Musk at the beginning of 2020 was, like third or fourth on this list. So in the year 2020, his net worth went up an enormous amount to where he bypassed Bezos, to like 184.7 billion. So the latest update is that Jeff is in the lead with 184.9 billion, and Elon is followed by 184.7. So just a mere 200 million, which would make me do in a headset drop and walk. That's what's separating them. So we kind of need to keep an eye on this because this could get nasty. You know how billionaires are. They start, throwing Molotov cocktails full of $100 bills at each other. And, we just can't have that on the streets of Los Angeles or Beverly Hills or wherever the hell it is they live. I will tell you this. A few years ago, I read an article about another one of our favorite billionaires, Michael Dell, who he and his wife bought the most expensive penthouse in New York a few years back. They paid $100 million for a penthouse in New York. So, you know, you're worth 37 billion. What's 100 million, right? Especially if you need a little place to stay when you're in New York City. Jeff, on the other hand, not to be outdone, had to buy the most expensive property in the United States, in LA, for $165 million. So I don't know what you do with a place like that. Turn it into a museum, I guess. You know, who the hell knows? But that's the latest on that. Now, I do have a news flash that I also found just startling. And for that, you kind of need to give you a little backdrop. Like I said, you guys know me. I grew up in a small town, small farming town. And there was a point in time in American history where Ted Turner was the largest landowner in the state of Montana. He owned more land in Montana than even the federal government. That's quite a feat when you consider how much land the federal government owns in every state.
Yeah.
But we now also have to be aware that Bill Gates is now the country's top farmland owner. Bill Gates, Mr. Microsoft. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to Seattle. In fact, I think our friend Rick was just there last year. And, you know, Seattle is a beautiful city. It's got, I won't say it has great weather, but, you know, depending on when you're there, it could be absolutely fantastic or one of the most miserable experiences you ever had. But the reality of it is the city is nice, or used to be, back before we decided to have sit-ins down there and furlough the police department. And, you have to go a long way to find farmland in Seattle. I mean, a long way. So Bill has become the country's largest farming landowner. And, you know, coming from where I come from in the little town of Mart, Texas, I never saw any farmers out in the fields taking care of business wearing slacks and a sweater. I just didn't. Never.
Interesting sight.
You know, I've seen a lot of things, but I never saw that. And so, you know, I hope Bill can, you know, find his Green Acres, you know, form and get it on. But, you know, it's interesting to me that this is now a thing. But I'm really glad that we don't have to worry about the Oracle of Omaha. Apparently, he just likes having cash and he's good. So I can safely report that the Oracle is doing just fine. And one last thing, Virgin Orbit had launched a rocket into space from a 747. So I think that was Richard Branson giving Elon Musk the big middle finger as he was flying over him.
Outstanding.
Kevin, I just got to say, I'm glad we've got you to keep tabs on these billionaires, because most of us working class folks don't have the time it takes to really stay on top of them. And I think you're doing a fantastic job.
Ditto.
Well, you know, Rick, I've always considered myself a man of the people. And so, you know, I just want to make sure that we all stay informed and that we don't lose any sleep over what these guys are doing. Because, you know, Elon's now a neighbor here in Austin. So, you know, definitely have to keep up on him. I might even have to get myself a motorcycle and a camera. I'm not sure.
Kevin, I am appreciative of the Michael Dell reference, actually, after these many years. That's a name I've not heard in a long time. Thank you for sharing that. I kind of wondered where he'd gone, truthfully.
I will tell you one thing that Michael Dell does that I have great respect for. I'm sure he doesn't do it. I'm sure he has a whole clan of people that do this. But anytime someone from Dell makes a mention of Dell on LinkedIn, he always posts on it. says thank you, or and replies to the person by name.
Really? Even
But
today?
suppose I've never seen a time where it didn't happen. So, I'm sure it's not Michael. Maybe he's sitting in his penthouse doing it. I don't know. I don't know where his house is here in Austin. There's a lot of huge houses that you can only see by air or boat. but but yeah, he does do that. So I think that's kind of cool.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much. We're going to expect some updates on these for our next podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Breeland. We're going to bring back another segment now that we haven't done for a while, but we've had a lot of news. So let's jump right into mortgage headlines. Our first story is from our friends at Housing Wire, doing a lot of good work over there. Kelsey Ramirez is the author of the story, which dates back to January 18th of the new year, and it's entitled, "The Title Insurance Arms Race Heats Up." And I'll note that Housing Wire has started to do a little coverage of the often overlooked but quite important settlement services industry, and they've done a nice job of it. Kelsey reports that there's been a surge in M&A activity in recent weeks in the settlement services sector. And the article, if you get a chance to read it, please do. They ascribe that to a few things. A flood of new technology, which of course we've been talking about on the origination side for a little bit of time now, and a surge of retiring industry veterans, which I think we've discussed with our guests a couple of times too, guys. And also apparently there's a push by the big four underwriters to expand market share and consolidate power. And I guess there's a number of ambitious regional upstarts as well. So I'm going to throw out to our peanut gallery here, your thoughts, guys. I know, Rick, you spent some time with me over in the title industry, and Kevin, you're no stranger, especially having been in ResPro. It's a very traditional industry, but it's been a while since we've seen a surge of M&A over there. What do you make of it?
Well, Brian, I would say this is just an extension of the M&A activity we're seeing industry-wide. When companies are making this much money and when it becomes this competitive, trying to get market share, a lot of times organic isn't going to work. They're going to have to acquire somebody. It doesn't surprise me now that we're getting over onto the title side. But what's interesting about that business, and you know much more about this than I do, is that there are far fewer big leaders in that part of the business than there are in the other parts of the business that we normally deal with when it comes to the mortgage ecosystem. So seeing those guys jostle around, that's like battle of the giants over there. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to shake out.
Me too, Rick. Me too. Kevin, what do you think?
Well, to me, it kind of goes back to, the battle of the billionaires, but on the corporate level. And, I was talking to a retired industry veteran a few weeks ago, and one of the things that he said to me, we were talking about the title insurance business and how it's changed. And one of the things that he said to me is that local and regional operators are getting squeezed out harder and harder all the time. It's more and more difficult for them to remain competitive in markets, especially in very competitive markets, because the big four are so big, and they keep getting larger. And while there's always going to be some sort of market for independent operators and maybe small regional operators, I think regional operators like you might find in Southern Florida and places like that are going to get squeezed out by the larger operators because those markets are just too large to ignore. The smaller markets, and I would say to some degree, maybe even New Orleans, and that market falls into a smaller market, may still and remain dominated by regional operators and local operators. But I think your major markets are going to just get squeezed out because there's just too much money on the table.
Well, let me toss this out to both of you. Kevin, if you want to take the first shot, how long does this go on? Are we looking at something that's going to happen for a couple of years, or is it going to even out pretty quickly over here? Both on the title side, and I'll even open that up now to the origination and mortgage side too.
Well, on the origination mortgage side, we have seen a contraction for a long time. I mean, going back even before the financial disaster of 2007. And we first saw it in our mortgage broker operations, the huge contraction that went on from there to just local and regional lenders who, because they lost warehousing lines or correspondent areas to sell loans to, there was a big void. A lot of the big players got out of it from 2007 to 2010. And unless you were delivering close to $1 billion a year or more in loan volume, you got cut out. So we had a huge contraction just from that. As far as the title side goes, to me, the title side has always been kind of this, local mom and pop, good old boy arena type thing that, works really well in Sheboygan, but it won't play in Madison because it's a different market. And I think the title industry has always played to the particular market, and by market, I mean county that they may be in. And I think what we're seeing now with the title side of it is the same thing we saw with the mortgage side 15 years ago, is just now going to start to contract. The bigger players aren't going to be willing to underwrite a lot of these smaller operations because they're on the hook for it. And they're looking, it's a risk liability. I say this all the time. It always goes back to how much risk you're willing to take on. If you're taking on all the risk, you might as well collect all the money. And I think that's what it's coming down to.
Rick?
Yeah, everything I'm hearing, Brian, is telling me that most experts expect the rest of this year to be pretty damn good, and maybe even 6 months into next year. So what that tells me on the M&A side is that people all this year are going to be looking to decide, is this as good as it gets? Is this my best chance to sell out? Can I sell out before the market tanks and people stop buying? But this is a different kind of market than we've seen in the past because lenders are making so much money. I mean, the change in, and this, Kevin, the change in origination volume from 2020, 2019 was significant, super significant. So a lot of big players are holding on to a lot of cash, and they can wait. They can wait until the price on these companies goes down and then just buy up geography later. Now, I'm working now. I've got friends in the M&A business on the lender side and the tech side, not so much on the title side. But I want to get these guys on the show sometime this year and get deep into that because I find it very interesting. And some people are going to make a lot of money by selling their companies before this year's over.
Well, I think a good company on the mortgage side to look at that is United Wholesale Mortgage. They're going into, they're going public. Matt's going to be sitting on an incredible amount of cash after that. And the reality of it is, what's going to keep United Wholesale Mortgage from getting even bigger than they already are, to taking more and more market? What's going to keep them from, going into, I'm sure they're thinking of other things that they could do to grow their market. They'll have the money to do it. And, I think those types of operations, not only the Chase and Wells Fargo's of the world, but I think those kind of non-bank operations, the Rocket Mortgages of the world, they are all sitting on just mountains of cash.
Well, we've got guaranteed rate coming up, right? We've got guaranteed rate with an IPO coming up shortly.
And
this is something you wouldn't have seen.
Yeah.
This is something
they can all do things that they can all do things that they've only been thinking about doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of that is going to depend. I'm sorry, Brian. Some of that's going to depend on what CFPB does. With the new director coming in and a new administration, there could be some, flies in the ointment for these guys in how they spend that kind of money and what kind of oversight they'll be under when they get it. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But there are a number of big lenders that are considering the IPO route right now.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Rick. We've got a lot of variables and wild cards ahead of us in 2021. If you thought 2020 was crazy, in fact, our next headlines go right to that. And there's a couple. It's the story that unless you've been under a rock for the last month or so, you know it. One comes from National Mortgage News, Hannah Lang, and this dates back to January 15th of 21. GSEs allowed to keep more earnings, but what comes next is uncertain. And back to Kelsey Ramirez at Housing Wire. Trump administration will not end GSE conservatorship, and her story was on January 14th. By now, we know that the current administration, via the FHFA and the Department of the Treasury, announced that they will not restructure the taxpayer stake in Freddie and Fannie. The GSEs will still not be exiting conservatorship. In fact, the statement even alluded to the fact that it definitely won't happen until the GSEs at least have 3% capital. The footnote here, and maybe not a footnote, they will be allowed now, the GSEs, to retain more of their earnings. So here's the question that's been asked since I think I was 3 years old. Maybe not quite that long, but it's been a while here. Will the GSEs ever leave will they ever leave conservatorship? Guys, what do you think?
Well, for me, I think the answer to that is no. And I think that's always been my view of it. Once the initial loan was paid back and then it started floating money to the Treasury that wasn't coming from anywhere else other than just there. I mean, that was excess money. And, think of the government as your children. If you put your children on $100 a week allowance and then grandma starts slipping them another 100, well, when grandma stops slipping that 100, it's like, whoa, wait a minute here, what's going on? You started me down this path. Why are you taking it away from me? And I think that's exactly what we got going on here. The GSEs are the federal government's grandmother, man. and let's face it, federal government's on the hook for all these mortgages anyway, so why not? I mean, the reality of it is FHA, which started out and is a federally funded program, has worked very, very well since the 30s. So why should the GSEs come out of conservatorship? The only reason I believe that, and you might want to edit this out, but I'm going to say it anyway. The only reason I believe there's any talk about taking GSEs out of conservatorship is the people who run it want to make more money.
We're leaving that one in, Kevin. Definitely.
And Kevin, I got to tell you, I agree with you. We like to think that our government is this entity, like this AI thing that just does what's best and right for all people. But really, it's just a collection of humans. And if you put a bunch of humans in the room and say, guys, I'm going to give you probably $10 to $20 billion a quarter that you can use for whatever you want, or you can give it back and make it a public concern and give it to investors. What are they going to do? All right. What are they going to do? I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that somebody in that room is going to say, well, wait, 20 billion. Well, we could use that for such good. And you're done. It's over. I don't think they're ever come out of conservatorship. And I'll be surprised if it's not a slippery slope that sees a bunch of other essential services delivered to U.S. taxpayers follow the same model in there. But now I'm getting into conspiracy theory territory, and I'm going to shut up.
Uh-oh. Yeah, we're almost becoming a different network here.
I think it goes back to, the United States government has prided itself from its creation to not nationalizing anything like foreign governments do. When foreign governments see something making money, they nationalize it and take it over. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see mortgage lending in a lot of other countries, because they don't want the real estate industry nationalized and all their profits taken. But this is the closest thing to nationalization we've ever ventured into. And I honestly believe that when it was first done, that it really was only going to be about 10 years and we'd be out of it. But no. And I believe in my own warped mind that that when Republicans and Democrats are in a room and they're talking about the GSEs, what the discussion is you got some Republicans sitting there going, you know, we could pay down the debt with it, leave this burden for our grandchildren. And then you might have some Democrats saying, yeah, but look at all the beautiful parkland we can create.
Of course.
That's what I think the argument is.
Not to say one is better than the other, Kevin. I agree.
That's
with you.
right.
I agree with you.
So if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly here, neither of you thinks too much of the footnote that the GSEs will be allowed to retain a little bit more in the way of their earnings. Anything to make of that, or just?
Well,
I think they're just giving them a raise so no one quits.
well, I mean, they have to do that to show that they're trying to help them build up that capital base that they need to go private, right? It's kind of a show of good faith, but did they say how much? And you know, it's. Yeah.
There's a formula, I believe. It's not a large amount. I mean, it'd be a large amount if it came into my bank account.
Yeah, if
not
we
a
were,
large amount for the GSE.
yeah, if we were sitting having this conversation in Vegas, none of us would vote, or none of us would bet that that they would be going private.
Sounds fair. Sounds fair. All right. Well, moving right along, guys, we've got an interesting little tidbit today from the settlement services publisher, October Research Corporation, and their publication, RESPA News. This article is dated January 8th of the new year. And there's actually two, but the one we're looking at, Schulman's peers reflect on Mr. RESPA's contributions to the industry. There's a related story, and in that story, it's mentioned that the longtime Meyer Brown partner, Phil Schulman, who a friend of the show, is stepping back from his role there and launching a new venture, which will combine comedy with business presentation. There's a little more to that, but for the sake of time. And as we know, Phil is beloved throughout the industry, not only for his knowledge of RESPA and his knowledge of the space, but his ability to combine humor somehow with RESPA and to do it well. Probably one of the best keynote speakers you'll ever see in the space. The article lines up an all-star list of experts to talk a little bit about Phil. They talk to friend of the show, Mark Sterbko, friend of the show, Brian Levy, too. There's another great guest. Loretta Salzano, guys, we need to have her back on again, but Loretta weighs in. Ken Trapetta, Respro president, great guy, really knows his stuff. And then, of course, another friend of the show, Trip Riley from Saul Ewing. All of them kind of chime in and tell some stories about Phil, and it's really quite worth the read. In fact, Brian Levy joked at one point, you know, like I could say to Phil, I'm quoting now, I could say to Phil, hey, that reminds me of number 6, and he'd laugh. But seriously, my favorite is where he says that tickets to the game, fill in your favorite lousy sports team like the New York Jets, are not a thing of value under RESPA. Brian's always good for a quote, guys. And this is a point where I mentioned, if you haven't seen Mortgage Musings, go read it. Come talk to us. Again, we'll get them to you. Just leave us an email in the show notes. I'll tell you what, guys, we know all these people. And Phil's a great guy. Why didn't we think of having them on to talk about this? Not intended to be a slight. It's you know, we want to move the podcast along. So when I do introduce you the first time, feel free to take a quick shot at Phil if you got a one-liner, or you could just say, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for whatever. We're going to try to get you all in at some point or another. And you see that there is a part in there where everyone gets to tell their favorite Phil moment or whatever else. When we get anyways, well, maybe next time we'll get the scoop. Without further ado, let's move on now. It's a new year. It's time to bring back the top 10 list. I'm confident we have more fun making these than you have watching them, but we're going to do them anyway. So this year, we're starting off the only way we can. Top 10 bold predictions for the mortgage industry in 2021. Number 10, the federal interest rate will drop below 1%. Disregard our previous 6 predictions. Number 9, the new CFPB director will announce that usury is now illegal. Several large banks will immediately demand a grandfather clause. Number 8, top 10 bold predictions for the new year. In related news, the CFPB will announce that it is building a new home office near Rehoboth Beach with an estimate on construction costs around $500 million. Number 7, the Biden administration will finally make a deal to end conservatorship for the GSEs, We're expecting a 25-year timeline with an opt-out clause for either the administration or the GSEs after 2 years. Number 6, top 10 bold predictions for 2021. In a stunning display of unity, members of Congress from both parties will join hands around a campfire on the lawn of the Capitol. Unfortunately, the gathering will break down when the parties are unable to agree on what song to sing. Number 5, bold predictions for the year 2021. Aliens will invade the planet, but none of the major news networks will cover the event, so no one will notice for months. Number 4, my beloved Cleveland Browns will go undefeated during the 2021 NFL season, winning all the way through the playoffs to reach the Super Bowl. Number 3, however, that Super Bowl will be postponed as Americans become aware of an alien invasion. Number 2, 3 guys in an iPad will finally actually produce a podcast that lasts less than 30 minutes. These are bold, guys. Who wrote these? And the number 1 bold prediction from 3 guys for 2021, after only several months in business, attorney Phil Schulman's new venture will file for an IPO. Experts will estimate the opening value at over $200 million. But And with that, guys, I think we did come in under 30 minutes, but it's not because we didn't have some fun. Thanks, as always, to my dear friends, Kevin Breeland and Rick Grant. For you out there, it's going to be a great year of 3 guys and an iPad. We've got some pretty serious guests lined up and some returning guests. We're going to do some new things as well. If you're following us, if you're connected with us on LinkedIn, keep your eyes open. We've got the YouTube channel, but we're also going to try some new things, maybe even record a little bit live through LinkedIn, and we'll be teasing some of the new shows. So check back, watch out for our teasers. But once again, unfortunately, you'll all recall the 2nd generation iPad that we used to record. I got it refurbished for Christmas, guys, but they didn't return the charger. So, Mr. Grant, please take us home.